Word, sailors.
So today we're going to go over the return portion of the hero's journey. This is our very last stage, so congratulations, we've made it all the way.
Much like your hero, who is now going to leave the special world, and the first step is the return of how your main character comes back to the ordinary world. This is a lot like the departure, where this isn't really a lengthy step. It's just literally your character returns to their ordinary world. It's worth noting, sometimes the return actually happens a little earlier in the story than like the crisis, for example. So in our Lion King example we're talking about, where Simba reclaims the Pride Lands and he returns to the Pride Lands, his return happens before the crisis because he has to actually go back to the Pride Lands to save them. So while it is step 9, note that the steps are kind of flexible in your actual storytelling.
After the return, we have new life, and this is where the main character's life is changed because of what has happened so far in the story.
And the main focus here is how the main character's life has changed. And if you haven't already, go ahead and pause the video and please summarize these first 2 steps we've talked about in your own words. So put the return into your own words and put the new life into your own words. Our new life example for Simba is essentially that Simba and Nala have a baby, and like now Simba is the king, and this is going to be his life going forward. So as a result of everything that's happened, your character has a very different life.
Next, we have the resolution. And so this is everything that's happened in your story so far that's a conflict is resolved and brought to some kind of an end, and all the characters have some kind of ending that is very clear and you can notice.
Yeah, new life and resolution are pretty similar. The main thing to understand is the difference between them is the new life is about how your main character's life has changed. We should have a clear sense of why your main character's life is different at the end of the story. The resolution is more about the world and more about all the other characters and all your other conflicts coming to an end. And it's very, very important that you list out every single conflict that's happening in your story. Every single friendship difficulty, every single side character having some kind of an arc. Everything needs to have an ending. You don't want to leave any loose threads.
In The Lion King, we see this when Simba's new baby is presented because it's shown that Rafiki is now back at his old post. You see Zazu back in his old post. You see all of the animals in the Pride Land are like healthy and they're standing there and they're waiting for this new baby to be presented. You can see the entire pack. Or the pride of lions back behind Simba and the baby, and everybody's back exactly where they were in the beginning of the story, and we've tied everybody's loose ends right back up.
All right, last but not least is the status quo. And the status quo is, as you may have noticed, also the first step of the story, but this is a new status quo. So as a result of the events of the story, the entire world has a new sense of normal to live in. This is why we call it the hero's journey is often called a cycle, because it always returns to some sort of status quo. Now, some stories, the status quo is actually the thing that gets protected. Sometimes the status quo at the end of the story is just back to what it was at the start. In the case of The Lion King, this is true. In the case of our modern Avengers movie, this is typically true. They have to fight the villains who want to change stuff, and they have to save the world and keep it normal and as is. In other stories like The Hunger Games or Harry Potter, the status quo needs a serious shift. Something about the current normal is wrong, and people fight to change that normal.
And that is your return. So in your Reader Writer Notebook, identify the last 4 steps of the hero's journey in The Outsiders. Number your notebook 1 through 4 and identify each step below. So on the first one, you're going to talk about the return. This is how Ponyboy comes back to the ordinary world.
It might be worth noting, Outsiders is one of those things where the return happens a little earlier than some of the other steps, so it won't cleanly follow this order.
His new life. Ponyboy's life is changed as a result of the events of the story.
This one should be pretty easy because Ponyboy pretty much straight up tells us how his life is different and how he feels different. And after that, we have the resolution. And the resolution is where every conflict in the story is resolved. This one I did point you in a little direction because all the characters have a clear endpoint. Our side characters have endings. What's Dallas's ending? What's Johnny's ending? What about our other greasers? What about the Socs? All right, so how do the other conflicts in the story end up resolved?
And then we have status quo. As a result of the events of the story, the entire world has a new sense of normal to live in. Describe what that sense of normal is in The Outsiders.
It's worth mentioning when we say the entire world, we mean the entire world of the book. So like no, we aren't changing the entire globe by the end of The Outsiders. You know, people over in Europe probably aren't feeling too different because of the events of The Outsiders in Tulsa, Oklahoma in the 60s. But the people in this community definitely have some changes in how they approach each other. So think about the big social groups in this book and what normal means for them after it ends.
All right, so you guys have some work to do in your notebooks, so go ahead and get that done.